Hey, greetings everyone. I hope you can hear me and perhaps see me. Welcome to the Island Innovation, the e-mobility session. I think we'll have a very good and interactive and productive session with some very exciting panelists. I'm going to just let you know who's involved, and then we'll just kind of plunge into the topics. We have four panelists that represent, I think, a pretty good range of the jurisdictions and the sectors involved. Joe Edgehill, who from Barbados, running a business, an EV business, which is great to hear from her. Leo Dwyer, who works with ChargePoint, again, a EV business. And this one is a global one, of course. Those of you that are involved in charging would know their company quite well. Then we have Stephen Mariani from Alameda, which many of you probably don't know is an island in San Francisco Bay and is involved in EVs. And then James Taylor, who's involved with electric vehicle racing, which I think is a really exciting topic for us all. So we have that basically collection of folks who represent, as I said, a pretty good range of the sectors and the jurisdictions involved in e-mobility and islands. And what I'd like to do is begin and motivate the conversation a bit. I will share my slides here a bit and give you some sense of, I don't know if people can see, hopefully you can see that. Everybody see my slides here?
Hi Adam, no, you're not sharing yet.
Okay, well I'll try one more time. There we go. How about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let me just, I don't want to take too much time in the background, but I do think it's kind of useful to kind of kick things off with a bit of a theme. And so let me just tell you a little bit about myself quickly. So I have, I think, a fairly broad perspective. I've been involved in consulting and entrepreneuring and teaching in renewable energy and power for a long time. And I think it gives me a pretty broad perspective, but I definitely do not have the depth that the panelists have in their particular areas. So, but that broad view, I think, gives me a little bit of a kind of a sense of, I think, I'm hoping where e-mobility needs to go and where it needs to go in certain places. I've done a fair amount of work in the Caribbean and some other islands around the world. But so let me just motivate this a little bit with a couple of slides that may be old hat, but possibly not. So the first thing I wanted to emphasize, which has been a relatively recent insight for me, since I do most of my work in the power business. Basically, this slide shows some calculations of the CO2 emissions by sector over the past 40 or 50 years. And while most people are quite understanding that power, electricity, is incredibly important, and you can see that in the blue if you can see your screen, transport is incredibly important. And there are a lot of projections that it's going to become even more important going forward. So my current mantra, which I think may be shared by many of you, is if we don't solve the transport problem, we don't solve the climate problem. And I think what's a bit scary about that is that that's a recognition I think that relatively few people have yet. There's all this focus, particularly in America, on the utility industry. But unfortunately, in my opinion, not enough focus now that we need to solve that problem. We also need to solve the transport problem. And of course, decarbonizing transport, electric vehicles have a lot to do with that. So I would say a big part of the motivation here is that we are here to help address what is probably the challenge of our age, climate, and we need to solve transport to solve that problem. End of story, in some ways. And one thing I'd like to point out is that we don't have to wait necessarily for solar, wind, and batteries to be everywhere. That if we were just to convert petroleum vehicles to electric vehicles fueled by natural gas, we would save a considerable amount of the CO2. So while it's certainly going to be much better when we can have solar and wind and batteries providing electricity, we can convert vehicles to electricity well before that and still do a great service to our environment. And so many of the islands that I work with, it's going to be a while before they're relying on low fossil or even no fossil electricity. But even now, converting those vehicles on those islands to a gas-based, let's say, electricity wouldn't be a bad thing. And in this example is from the Union of Concerned Scientists that point out that it's about a 50% cut in emissions. Even with fugitive emissions from gas, it might still be good to do this conversion sooner rather than later. So again, I just want to make sure people are aware that you don't have to wait for solar, wind, and batteries to want to go electric and help the climate issue. That's the second point. And then the last point is, and this is a little bit facetious, you may have seen this picture that shows a minister from the Maldives signing some documents underwater. Bottom line, as we all know, most islands, if not all islands, are particularly vulnerable to climate issues. And so that's one reason to motivate this whole session. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And I think the plan we'd like to go on, the direction we'd like to go in now is for basically to get some introductory remarks from our panelists. And then we'd also like to plunge into questions and answers, of course. And I guess I'd like to start with Jo, if she's available and willing, and she will share her screen and give a little introduction to what she's doing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. What a great introduction. Good afternoon for those who, it is an afternoon, which is certainly me here in Barbados. And good morning or good night to the rest of you. A real shout out to the first ever virtual island summit. I mean, amazing, James. So well done for creating this product. I'm now going to share my slide and talk a little bit about what we're doing primarily in Barbados, but also a little bit of the projects that we're reaching across the region, the Caribbean region. So I shall just, right. Aha, there we go. Okay, just shuffling my own screen around, but hopefully everyone can see that. Can I get a thumbs up? Adam, you seeing the screen okay?
Yes, I can for sure.
Beautiful. Okay, so this is our branding in Barbados. This is an ENV200 electric van, and it was our most popular seller last year. It's a panel van, it's a Nissan product. You can fit all kinds of things in the back of it. Oh, how do I, aha, there we go. So a bit about Megapower. So really, this is our mission statement. We focus on promoting the uptake of electric vehicles powered by renewable sources. And I'm excited to say that across Barbados, all the electric cars and vans that we've sold are completely offset by solar PV installations island-wide. So we're pumping more into the grid than we're taking out in terms of electricity consumed by the vehicles. We're permanently here since 2013. We also have an office in Antigua, and really critical to our growth and success has been a close working relationship with a number of electric utilities across the region, primarily Caribbean. So in Barbados, the owner of Barbados Light and Power, but then also stakeholders in Grand Bahama Power, in Domlec, in Lucilec, and Vinlec as well. So in Dominica, St. Vincent, and St. Lucia. Okay, so I've been asked to speak on really what are those critical factors for EV uptake. And James Taylor, this photo in the far right, or my far right, maybe it's your far left, is Bushy Park in Barbados, and a perfect place for EV racing or any kind of racing. Motorsport is huge in Barbados. So when we started to think about how do we really promote public awareness, we knew that we needed to tap into motorsport and looking at really how fast and exciting the instant acceleration and torque that electric vehicles give. Also the fact that they are regular vehicles. Getting rid of myths like, oh, a little bit of rain will flood and electrocute me, or will my EV get up the hill? So public awareness was a big part at the start. I mean, product as well. So what products will work well and sell well in Barbados and other Caribbean islands, given our traditionally high duty structure for all vehicles, which has been extended to electric vehicles. And I mean, this is a topic in itself. In Barbados, electric vehicles attract a duty of 55% upwards. And this varies from country to country. In Antigua, they're 0 rated. In Jamaica, it's 30.5%. And I'll stop there, but that's a topic in itself. A public EV charging point, so network. So despite our small size, what a public network has done, it's enabled people to see that electric vehicles are possible. Even with our small size of 166 square miles, there is still that range anxiety, there's still that feeling, especially with a new technology. But having charging points, and in Barbados, they're no further than 5 kilometers apart, has really enabled the growth. Policy and regulation is key. Pricing, of course, as well. So looking at although the technological factor has led to electric cars and vans being more expensive than regular cars and vans, really looking at pricing models to show consumers that, hey, actually you might pay more at the purchase point, but you're saving. So in the context of gas and electricity prices in Barbados, a customer spending 300 US per month or per week or per whatever on gas or diesel would spend roughly 100 for the equivalent distance with an electric vehicle. So really building these factors in so that consumers understand. And then partnerships, both partnerships in terms of the private sector, business to business sales, looking at fleet vehicle analysis and swaps, but also partnerships by way of those persons have given up space in car parks for our charging network, and of course the utility and the government as well. And I can't scream enough about electric utility involvement, where I've seen EVs really work for Barbados, but also across the region, has been where there's been a very active electric utility who understands, hey, this is a new revenue stream for me. Of course we want electric vehicles. And not all are like that. This is a quick snapshot. So yes, I mean, I spoke to it earlier. 166 square miles, we're a small population, not as small as some of our neighbors, but still small. A little bit about the charging network as well. What you'll see here is a summary. So this is available on plugshare.com, which is a mobile app where you can see it online. And you can look by country as well. So you might be I'm curious to see, you know, is your country on PlugShare, and how does that maybe compare in terms of network density and availability and access? You can actually click on each of these and it'll give you a little bit of information and a photo and user comments. You can also, for some countries, book a charger or log in, and, you know, I'm sure we'll hear more from Leah on that. So I will keep going. Again, the charging infrastructure that we have. So we have a variety of chargers. I often get a question, how long will my vehicle take to charge? And that really depends on, you know, what are you plugging into and what is your vehicle? This is the Megapower charge card. So this gives you access. It's an RFID card. You swipe it at the location and it will connect you in. James said to put pretty pictures. So here you go. This is Sharon in my office plugging in her car under a solar carport. You can't quite see the solar in that photo, but it gives you an idea of our business here in Barbados. Product and range. So we also get asked, you know, battery, how long will my battery live for? And this is my most exciting thing to say. The battery technology has just grown and grown and grown, meaning that maybe if you had a 24 kilowatt battery with, say, 140 kilometers of range, when you get 20% degradation on your battery, it might start to be a nuisance, 30%, 40%. But take now here, and this is a screenshot from a Nissan ENV200 van, 268 kilometers of range to go. So even with your 50% degradation, you're still way cool and clear on an island like Barbados, and like many of your islands, where in Barbados, our typical customer is driving just 40 kilometers a day. So I think as the technology in the batteries has improved in terms of range, and as well as efficiency, so too has the issue become lesser in terms of battery life. EV maintenance and repair. This is a couple photos from some of the work that we've done in Grenada, in Aruba, as well as in Barbados. So across the region, we've worked with the Institute of the Motor Industry. This is a UK body to certify technicians in electric vehicle repair and replacement. We currently certified 72 from as far south as Guyana up to Grand Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. We're running a training next week with the Samuel Jackson Prescott Institute of Technology. And that will be looking at a train the trainer model. So how do we build in EV repair and EV servicing into regular auto technician curriculum and training? Ease of purchase, access to finance. This is a big one. And we've, partnered. This is just an illustration of a recent promotion we had with CIBC, one of the local banks, and regional banks as well. But we've looked at this from day one because someone coming in here needs to know, hey, can I lease a vehicle? Can I get a vehicle loan? Is it comparable to others? So that's really what we've looked to do, make the access to finance piece by partnerships possible for customers to buy electric vehicles. A very quick example, this is Flow, a telecommunications company. Last year, they swapped 8 diesel vans to 8 electric vans. And you can see, their annualized savings are above 5,000 US per van, just looking at the gas aspect of their swap. And finally, battery reuse. So we've built the Caribbean's first battery reuse laboratory. And we're looking at what applications can we use batteries in. My office where I'm sat now in Wildy, we've combined modules from a 30 kilowatt leaf to create a power pack that is 30 kilowatts linked to a solar PV carport outside. I wish I could walk and show you, but everyone needs to come to Barbados. And so we've gone completely off-grid here. And we're powering, 4 AC units, fridge, lights, etc. And that's what we're doing with used EV batteries. We're also looking at off-grid streetlights and golf carts. We've got about 50 in application across 2 golf courses in Barbados. And I think that's me spent out on time, but I'm here for the session and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Joe. I guess I'd like to have a little bit of interaction, and I would like to paraphrase one question that's already come up. Let me see if I'll do justice to it. I think the idea is that it seems that this whole e-mobility thing really does fit, really does save money, makes a lot of sense, particularly in, let's say, Barbados and elsewhere, but it hasn't caught on quite as rapidly as you might think, and particularly at the fleet level. And you mentioned a fleet in one of your applications, where the people are saving money. And so I guess my question to you is, have you been looking at, you have been, but what are your thoughts about fleets, including things like school buses and municipal buses? And why isn't more happening on that front? Maybe more is happening, but what are your thoughts about that?
Sure, so we're a right-hand drive market here. And what I'm seeing on a global level is that the manufacturers have more focused on the left-hand drive market. So when you talk about minibuses, there are only a couple that I can think of available in, say, like a 14-seater configuration. They are very expensive. I'm talking 5 times the cost of, a like-for-like ICE vehicle. And I think that's still very off-putting for many people that, really would like that electric vehicle. But when you start to talk about 5 times the cost and very little product availability and selection, that transition becomes difficult.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And I guess maybe we should move on. I think, Stephen, are you available to take over?
Yes, thanks, Adam. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so just to briefly reintroduce myself, thanks Adam again for that introduction earlier, and thank you Joe for all that great information about what your business is doing. So I'm here representing the City of Alameda as well as our electric utility, Alameda Municipal Power. I'll go into a little bit of an overview of our island and then talk about sort of the status of transportation electrification as it currently stands. But overall, I'm excited to share some insights from the utility perspective and hopefully insights for some organizations out there that are looking to work with utilities in terms of how we can sort of put e-mobility at the forefront of our actions. Let me see if I can change slides here quickly. All right, so just a brief overview of what I'll be talking about. First, I will cover some of the characteristics of our island. Then I'll cover sort of some of our commitments that we've made for environmental action. Then I'll get into a snapshot of our electric vehicles here on the island, as well as some of the programs that we have to promote electric vehicles. And lastly, I'll just give a quick glimpse at where we see EVs going in the future on Alameda. So for those of you who don't know, Alameda is an island located in San Francisco Bay in Northern California. You can see it here in the red box. So it is just east of San Francisco and south of Oakland. The city covers 22.8 square miles and spans over 2 islands. So Alameda Island is the main one, just north, and then to the south is Bay Farm Island, which actually you can see juts out from the landmass in East Bay, in the Bay Area. Trouble with these slides. Okay, there we go. So the city of Alameda has a population of approximately 80,000. Our island is primarily suburban with a mix of small and medium businesses. Relatively, we have just a few large commercial customers and not a lot of industrial activity. And as a little piece of information, history of Alameda, there was a large Navy base on Alameda Island that made up about 1/3 of the electric utility's annual revenues, and that was decommissioned in 1996. Some more history, we were founded in 1887, so that makes AMP the oldest public electric utility in California and among the oldest in the United States. Alameda has about 35,000 customers, and 90% of these are residential. Our annual load is about 350 gigawatt hours, and our peak demand is 61 megawatts. The residential class makes up about 1/3 of that annual load. A couple more facts. AMP is self-regulated by the city's Public Utilities Board, and we are a part of a joint powers agency, which is the Northern California Power Agency. This is a consortium of 16 other public electric utilities in Northern California. We came together formed about 50 years ago for joint ventures investing in generation resources and other services. So to move more into the e-mobility space and why that's so important to us, as an island, Alameda does face a greater risk for sea level rise than other cities in the region. And back in March, our city declared a climate emergency. So out of that came this climate action and resiliency plan. There's a link in the slides, but I can also share that in the chat function. This is sort of the driving policy across Alameda for a lot of the climate action that has been called upon departments, including AMP and other city departments, for actions that we can take. Planning departments, public works, those sorts of departments. So in addition to the climate action plan, AMP also develops a strategic plan to meet its own community, business, and environmental goals. So this is a snapshot from the most recent plan, which was published in January. As you can see, one of our top goals in this plan is sustainability. So the main focus of sort of this discussion is that tactic 1 under strategy 1, which is promote electrification of transportation through our electric vehicle plan. But I will quickly touch on the second strategy here, just quickly. I will say that AMP's primary primary focus has been on light-duty electric vehicles, just given the makeup of its population. But there are other city departments working in the ways of e-scooters, electric buses, and e-bikes for other forms of transportation. But just as I mentioned, a quick plug. So starting next year, Alameda will have 100% clean energy portfolio. This is a result mainly of some early investments in clean power that we were able to achieve this. So I will say that this is also a driving force behind some of our work in the e-mobility space, since we've already sort of gotten ahead of California's goals to meet the sort of climate priorities. We're able to put more of a focus onto the electrification of both buildings, but mainly transportation. So our resource mix currently contains geothermal, hydroelectric, landfill gas, and wind resources. And we have a growing capacity of rooftop solar in our city as well. So now onto a snapshot of our electric vehicle mix in the city. You can see on the left here are the percentages of cars by fuel type. And so in the blue is California and the green is Alameda. So the numbers are small here, but that ZEV, zero emission vehicles, that covers both full battery electric and plug-in hybrids. You can see that we're about double the statewide adoption rate currently. But again, these are still small numbers, about 2.8% of the residential vehicle ownership on the island, so to put that in absolute terms, we have about 1,500 electric vehicles currently on the island with an average age of less than 3 years. And to compare that, I believe there are about 55,000 vehicles currently on the island. And then looking at the breakdown of those vehicles by type, the majority are those BEVs, the battery electric vehicles. So that's the graph in the bottom right. And about half as well are those plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, with just a small portion from hydrogen fuel cell at the moment. So to get into what Alameda Municipal Power is doing to promote the electrification of transportation, we have many offerings at the moment, largely sort of in the financial space. So there's a build discount for residential customers who own EVs. There are rebates that we offer for charging infrastructure both at home and for businesses to install public chargers. We have rate discounts for fleet vehicles and golf carts for our one golf course on the island. And we just recently made the 2 fast charging stations that are located at our service offices free for the public to use. In addition, areas that we're looking into are a time of use rate, which actually Adam's firm helped us develop recently, and we'll be rolling that out in the coming months. Sort of as an alternative to the monthly bill discount, sort of the time of use offers both benefits for the customers who can save money if they switch their charging into the off-peak hours, and it also has benefits for the utility in terms of load management. Other areas that we're hoping to pursue are charging rebates for multi-unit properties. These can be particularly difficult to get charging installed in just because there's split benefits for renters and property owners. Another target group is low income and moderate income customers. So a rebate for used electric vehicle purchases is one of the areas we're pursuing. And lastly would be a rebate for the electric forklifts in Alameda. So in the next slide, in addition to the programs that we've had that are sort of more financial in nature, we also recognize the importance of education when it comes to EV adoption. So some of the measures we've been taking have been to create a calculator for customers to use. This is sort of tailored to the time of use rate. So customers can go on and see sort of what their bill impact would be for purchasing an electric vehicle, and how they may be able to achieve some of the savings by switching onto a time of use rate. Another thing we've been pursuing is having public workshops for prospective EV owners. Also having ride and drive events, which actually gets customers behind the wheel of electric vehicles. I think this is both to promote awareness, but also just familiarity with how it feels to drive one of these, getting at some of the range anxiety concerns that Joe touched on earlier. That's certainly a big area where we're trying to promote awareness and education. And lastly would be that marketing campaign that specifically targets low-income customers. Just a couple of facts about the current EVs in the island. We are seeing definitely a correlation between some of our higher income customers and that EV adoption. I believe about a third of the EVs currently are Teslas, and about 90% of those EV owners are also homeowners. So there's just some correlating factors that have led us to sort of want to target more low income and moderate income customers for this EV growth. And lastly, I'll just present some estimates. This will be going into our integrated resource plan, which is soon to be adopted by our Public Utilities Board. But just as a disclaimer, these haven't been published yet and fully adopted. So, but this is sort of where we see the growth of electric vehicles on Alameda. These are based on projections that the California Energy Commission has made for market shares. And we see that in the next 20 years, electric vehicles may become close to a third of the total residential vehicles on the island. So this is all very exciting. We have definitely been turning our main focus to the e-mobility sector, specifically sort of reiterating earlier, getting to those goals of achieving 100% carbon-free portfolio. This has been sort of our main focus. So thanks, Adam. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Stephen. First, let me kick off, if I can, a poll, which we've done this at the various other sessions. So I don't know, James, if you can do that, we're going to have a poll, a couple of polls. The first one here is, where do you consider home? So I'd like people to answer that one. And we'll see what kind of geographic diversity we have. Okay, look, pretty good. Okay, so we have North America is in the lead, but we have representatives from just about, well, for many of the regions of the world. That's great to hear. And I think, again, that we have a pretty good representation among the panelists in different parts of the world as well. So that's very good to see. And then there's a second poll, which is what sector you're in. Be great to hear that as well, see that as well. And then while we're waiting for that, Steve and I have, again, in the spirit of real-time questions, I have one question for you, kind of tying a bit with what Joe said. So I think we probably all agree that utilities and electric power suppliers have a very, very critical role in e-mobility. And it sounds like that's becoming part of your consciousness at Alameda. What I've seen in other firms is that, not so much you guys, because you're not really profit driven, but that many utilities are now seeing that electrification is kind of a solution to a problem they have, which is not enough demand. And so whether you're socially driven like Alameda is perhaps, or profit driven like other utilities, that there does seem to be this kind of emerging interest in e-mobility. But I'm not sure that extends to, let's say, all the islands of the Caribbean. The utilities there, I have a feeling, are not entirely on the same page. But I guess my question for you, maybe just emphasizing some of what you've said, is and again, we can answer it after the poll, is how important do you see e-mobility as being in your strategy as a firm and as a utility? And do you see that being duplicated in other utilities, either in California or elsewhere? So let's go to the poll, and then we can deal with that question. So the poll, it looks like we're dominated. Again, we have representatives from just about all sectors, but largely the private sector, which I guess is a good thing. But good representation essentially in many different sectors. So let me just go back to the question for you, Stephen, which is kind of, how do you, to paraphrase or to summarize, what kind of commercial, I guess, or what kind of strategic sense do you have about e-mobility and its role in your utility and other utilities?
Yeah, I would say what sort of sets us apart, again, kind of reiterating what I earlier said, I mean, California has set a lot of goals for sort of greening up people's resource mix. So I think at the current moment, that's where a lot of the focus is for utility companies, getting to that point. But again, there is the benefit, the mutual benefit for the utility and the customers sort of getting that load growth through e-mobility. I will say another driving force though is from that climate action plan, we've identified that I believe by 2020, I think 70% of the emissions will be from the transportation sector. And I think that's higher because we don't have sort of the emissions from our power portfolio. So I think that's sort of what puts the higher emphasis on the transportation sector. But I think in terms of our strategy, there's a lot of sort of stakeholders that can benefit from e-mobility, especially partnering with getting more charging infrastructure into the city. But I think there's also, yeah, definitely the social goal is one of sort of the most driving force. We have an incredibly environmentally conscious community here, and they push for a lot of the utilities actions, but they themselves are also driven to make the switch from ICE over to electric vehicles. So I think it's mostly a confluence of where we're situated in California, what our community cares about, but also sort of what we're able to put our focus on given our resource mix.
Great, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
So now, can we turn to racing? James Taylor, are you available?
I am. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen now. 1 second. Just confirming that you can see it.
I can, certainly.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you very much. And James, congratulations on a fantastic summit so far. And Joe and Stephen, it's a pleasure to be on the panel with you. So firstly, just to introduce Extreme. Yes, it's a new form of global electric off-road motorsports. We are setting up a new championship with the first season starting in 2021. We were founded by Alejandro Gag late last year, who is also the founder of the FIA Formula E Electric Series, and which has now been running for 6 years. So in terms of our mission is to showcase electric SUV performance in extreme conditions. So gravel, sand, ice, mountains, etc. But at the same time, and crucially, generating global action to combat the devastating environmental issues threatening our planet's future. And obviously, the relevance for islands and coastal regions of the world is that they are some of the most vulnerable and damaged. So we'll be making them an absolute focal point of the championship. So in essence, we are using the unique way in which sports, I suppose, resonates across the world to showcase electric car technology, promote the use of electric cars, and to raise awareness of environmental issues affecting the areas in which we're going to race. And this is our car. This is the Odyssey 21. Quite nice to say, actually, it's been properly tested for the first time today in France. We're really, really pleased with the results of testing. We had 3 drivers from 2 from the FIA World Rallycross Championship who tested it, and together with a lady called Michaela, a Swedish racing driver who was provided by our tyre partner Continental, and the reports from that so far are really, really positive. So how are we doing this and where are we going to race? So unlike traditional racing series, we're going to be going to far more extreme locations. So without spectators, and to areas that have already been damaged by weather and by man and by climate change. So in season 1, we're going to hold 5 events. As I said, that'll be in 2021. 1 in the desert, 1 in the Himalayas, 1 in Greenland, 1 in Brazil that we announced last week, and also 1 in an island coastal location. Now we are still looking for the island coastal location, and would certainly welcome any suggestions from the members of the summit and those of you online now. So the key areas we're going to explore for the island location are, and showcase, are plastic pollution, sand mining, and sea level rise. We may obviously not find all in one place, but certainly if we can touch on various elements, we'd be delighted. In terms of racing, we will go to a different island location each year, which will give more opportunities to showcase these different elements of climate change and of environmental issues that we're seeing across the world. Just briefly, in terms of the racing format, it will take place over 3 days with a series of head-to-head races on the first 2 days, and then a finals day leading to a semi-final and final at the end of that third day. The tracks are quite unique in that they will be between 6 and 10 kilometers long. So not like a traditional race track, not the length of a rally track, but somewhere in between. In a coastal location, for example, we might start and finish on a beach and then go inland to damaged areas there. So we're very open-minded to the type of terrain that we race on. And part of that is, as I've already said, is just to showcase the abilities of these fantastic cars. It is mainly a media product. We won't have spectators. I mean, there might be a few people who obviously live at these locations, but mainly it will be a media product, with the major media product being like a Netflix or Amazon style documentary series following the championship, right from the initial stages of building the championship, following the teams, the drivers, the car manufacturers as they prepare the car, and then the races themselves. And then crucially, the legacy element after we've left each location, and I'll come on to that shortly. And obviously supporting the media product, the broadcast side, will be the social media element through the usual channels, as well as the more traditional live broadcasts of the racing itself. Again, this is all to maximize the exposure of the racing side, but also to tell the story of climate change and the environmental issues affecting areas that we're racing. There are some statistics on the car, which I won't go through in too much detail now, but there are some elements on there. And then in terms of the drivers, we've already signed up our Extremely Drivers program, which is a pool of top-class drivers from across a number of the major FIA World Championships and other major national championships. As you can see, we've got both male drivers and female drivers on there. That's a key element of our championship. We're also looking at involving disabled drivers, just to show how adaptable these cars are. We will be adapting the cars to allow disabled drivers to drive these and race in the championship as well. So just very briefly, a few unique elements. We've actually bought the St. Helena ship, and we are currently fitting it out to be as green as possible. And this is going to be our floating paddock to transport cars, equipment around the world. So it is, we're pretty proud of this. The image you can see on the screen at the moment is the mock-up of how we're going to paint it. It's currently being fitted out, and then that imagery will go on the ship. Key element here is to reduce the movement of equipment by aircraft to ensure that we are as green as possible in terms of our emissions. On the ship, as I said, there will be the Extremely paddock. Here's a mock-up of that, with each team having its space and its space for the various mechanics and engineers. There'll be a research laboratory on board. And one of the elements we're doing so far is to plan a ocean pollution, ocean plastic element to our research. Yes, we are racing in extreme and fairly remote locations. However, we will also run a series of city centre coastal roadshows between each location, so that we can bring the story of the Extremely Championship, of electric mobility, the sheer technology that goes into these cars and also the detail about the environmental issues and the climate change issues that we have at each of our race locations to the cities, to the major populations. And so we will run these road shows, likely to be between 3 and 5 of these each year. As I briefly mentioned earlier, a crucial element of Extreme E is the legacy program. And we've made a commitment to leave the race locations in a better state than when we arrived. So working with the University of Cambridge's Centre for Climate Repair, we will work with a specialist in each area of the world where we're racing to ensure that the legacy we leave improves the immediate environment, but also promotes e-mobility amongst the local populations. So just very briefly, for example, in Greenland, we'll be working with local schools to educate the pupils there about electric technology. And we'll also provide them with electric car kits so they can actually go off and make their own vehicles. And then finally on legacy, we've also joined the UN Sports for Climate Change initiative, which is a new program of like-minded sporting properties who have made commitments. In fact, I've listed the commitments here to climate neutrality. So those commitments are promote greener environmental responsibility, reduce the overall climate impact from sports, use its platform to educate for climate action, promote sustainable and responsible consumption, and advocate for climate action through its communication. So they're my slides, and please do ask if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, James. This is Adam again. And I do have a question for you, which I think follows up from your presentation. So clearly you're in a business, and the media, PR aspects of this are very, very important. But you mentioned Cambridge and partnerships. And I am curious, as you well know, and I don't know much about it, but as you well know, Honda was big in racing, or maybe still be big in racing, and technologies from racing were then used on the street. I'm kind of curious, to me, it would be really, really a positive thing if you were to say, be able to draw from your experience and improve battery technology or engine technology in electric vehicles. Is that an important part of what you're doing? Are there partners you have for technology transfer as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a crucial element of this is that car manufacturers will be able to take the chassis of the car, and they will be able to put their own bodywork on the car, and so that they will be able to show off their road-going cars in a racing format. And so that will then involve the car manufacturers, or OEMs as we refer to them, in the championship, in the development of technology that goes on the car. Now, it is a fine balance. It's really important for us to create a sustainable, financially sustainable championship, that not too many elements of the car are left open. Because if you do that, you just create a technology war between the car manufacturers. So we certainly wouldn't want to have everything wide open, but there will be elements that will be, be left open for car manufacturers to make their own tweaks and develop technology which will then be seen on the roads. And we've certainly seen that over the years in first Formula One, when it really set the pace for that a number of years ago. And now in Formula E, we've seen some of the major car manufacturers involved in Formula E have used the technology that they've put into their cars directly into their road-going vehicles.
So much. I'm hoping, we've had a few technological issues with Leia, but I'm hoping she might be there and available. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, hi, I'm here and available.
That's
so
good.
I'm going to try to show my slides now.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Okay, so you can see my screen.
I can. This is Adam.
Great. Okay. Well, hopefully everybody can see my screen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the company that I work for, ChargePoint, and give you a sense of the kind of organizations that have emerged over the last decade or so in the electric vehicle energy supply side of the industry. And I'm conscious of the time. I have a dead stop myself in 10 minutes, so I'm going to go through a few slides very quickly. So we are a 10-year-old, well, we're actually now a 12-year-old company, but we've been, we used to say we were a 10-year-old company in a 5-year-old industry. It's been quite a tough start for the electric vehicle supply equipment industry, because certainly as we just heard about cars, you know, the infrastructure isn't as cool as the vehicles. And people have made assumptions in that you can just plug it in and somehow it will charge. But of course, there's a lot more to it than that. So what ChargePoint has been doing for more than a decade now is really solving those problems. And now we see that there is a recognition around the world and in many, many markets of the challenges that EV adoption faces. And many of those challenges are associated with the infrastructure. And it's not just any kind of infrastructure that you need to charge EVs, you need particular kinds. And there's quite a few differences out there in different technologies, different vehicle charging requirements. And then there's the whole issue of software systems that sit behind all of the infrastructure that connects those infrastructure to the vehicles. So what we do at ChargePoint is we provide a range of charging hardware, starting from basic home charging units. So on the slide that you can see, that's the little box on the far left, right over to high-powered DC charging stations, which charge electric buses and electric trucks. And when we think about electric trucks, we don't think about small vehicles that bring, you know, perhaps one pallet of goods. We think about vehicles that can bring 12 pallets. We're working on projects where we're looking at trucks at over 50 tons gross weight, which will be on the road within 5 years. So electrification is coming, it's coming very fast, but there's still a lot of challenges around the infrastructure. So as I said, we were founded in California, so we're a Silicon Valley company. We currently number over 600 employees, and more than 200 of those people are focused on engineering. So we have over 60 patents today in the e-mobility technology space. We have offices at our headquarters in California. We have a large service center with more than 100 people in Scottsdale, Arizona. And our European office headquarters is in Amsterdam. We also have an office in Munich, and we have an engineering center, particularly for our converter technology, just outside London, with a software development team located in India. Our focus as a company is to provide both the charging hardware and the software systems, the network systems that sits on top of that infrastructure. So we also manufacture a lot of our equipment, particularly our DC charging equipment. So we manufacture that in California, and we deliver DC chargers throughout Europe and North America. And since we started bringing this particular product onto the market earlier this year, we've delivered over 1,000 units with a very significant order book that we're trying to work through right now. We also put a lot of emphasis on the quality and the resilience of the systems that go into the field. We've recently opened a 1,600 square foot test and research lab in San Jose, where we have large environmental chambers to be able to test our devices and to be able to then put products in the field that can withstand the extremes of high desert or some of the very cold parts of Canada that we have to put equipment out in. So our approach is really focused on two sides. It's the hardware, and then it's the network services. ChargePoint is an open network, so we have our own network and our own equipment on that, but within our network, we also support third-party equipment. So we have a process we call on-ramp, where we bring products, hardware products from other manufacturers, and we put those onto the ChargePoint network. We also have an extensive activity around roaming integration, where we roam across other ChargePoint networks so that a customer of ChargePoint is able to seamlessly roam across other networks. And that's a very important aspect for e-mobility adoption, that people don't have to have multiple accounts across multiple charge point operators. So the equipment should be interoperable with all the vehicles, but equally the user should be able to roam across different networks, as we do today with mobile phones. So when we talk about having network charging equipment, in simple terms, that means that all of the devices are connected. We can see what's happening on those devices in real time, and that allows us then to offer a significant number of different business models for our customers. So at a basic level, we have analytics and data performance information about the equipment. We also have very interesting features like waitlist. I've just put a few of those here together in this slide. Waitlist is very interesting in that if you're planning a journey, and when you get to the end of the journey or midpoint on your travel, you may want to access a charging station. With the waitlist function, people can book the charging station in advance. And we now have a queuing feature within that. So you know that when you get to the location that it's reserved for you, or that you're second in line, or so on. Energy management is very important, and we heard from Alameda Island earlier. The idea that you can ramp down charging stations to match conditions on the grid, or to match pricing issues on the grid side, is very important, and we're able to do that with our publicly installed infrastructure today. Incidentally, ChargePoint has a 70% market share in North America, so we have over 70,000 charging stations in the ground right now. We also offer quite a few options on access control. Again, this is important for customers, that they can the equipment must be reliable, it must be available, but also the customer should be able to access it. And on one of the very early presentations, we saw a key fob. In addition to that, our stations today on the hardware side can use a telephone, a mobile phone, to access them. And we also have sort of auto charge feature where you can just plug and charge. We provide a lot of fleet services. I mentioned heavy truck and bus, so that's an area that we're heavily involved in. I'm responsible for truck and bus at ChargePoint, and there's a lot of interest in businesses now deploying electric delivery trucks, electric delivery vans, and we support that with a specific range of hardware and software features. And then something also maybe worth mentioning is that we run a lot of API integration with different fleet management tools, but also with utilities for real-time demand response. We have a large and diverse customer base. So for people who are familiar with the US market, indeed, there's many international companies here as well. These are the customers of ChargePoint and have been for more than 10 years, people who are rolling out infrastructure at their own locations. And some of those are now also customers in the critical infrastructure space. So you start to see some utilities across there. You see retail operators, and you see ChargePoint network operators as well. So in the past hour, so pretty much since we started this call on the ChargePoint network, we're told that 94 people have searched for a place to charge using our app. 450 people have charged at home, and 1,600 people have plugged into a public charging station. So I think the key message from this, really, in terms of EV adoption, is that it's important to have good quality, resilient hardware connected to a intelligent network, which provides ease of access for electric vehicle drivers and electric vehicle infrastructure owners and operators. And I think that's my slides, and that's almost all of our time up.
You have to leave basically at the hour, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a few minutes, but I've got some people waiting. But
yeah, thank you so much.
So they can wait.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your being here despite your time crunch. Let me ask you one quick question, which ties in with some questions that have been asked. And I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but you clearly have a massive presence in North America. Can you mention at all an island that is going well for you, or that you hope would go well in terms of, there seems to be this idea that an infrastructure development on a small island would be a good thing. Any thoughts about where that looks like it's happening well, or maybe not so well?
Yeah, so one of the challenges with islands in the past is that has actually been the vehicles. So because the island markets they tend to be rather small for vehicle numbers, OEMs just haven't brought the electric vehicles to the market. So right now we see that for actually transit bus, where in one of the islands in the Caribbean, somebody wants to deploy electric vehicles, but actually getting the vehicles and getting the support for those vehicles. Because currently, if you deploy buses, at Alameda County Transit, AC County Transit, which is at Alameda Island, you can access, you can leverage service and maintenance from the city of San Francisco. And from the surrounding Bay Area, where you have multiple transit agencies, and there's lots of support for vehicles. But when you move to an island, which is several hours flying away, from Miami or from somewhere else like that, then it becomes much harder. So it becomes much more expensive. So I think because the technology is so new, putting the equipment out in remote locations is definitely not without its challenges. One of the other problems on the island is islands, while they're suitable for electric vehicles, in one sense in that they're small and the distances are short, islands are often, not all, but several, especially in the Caribbean, tend to be quite hilly, and battery performance is affected by hills. Now you definitely gain with energy recovery coming down the hill, but getting up the hill certainly drains a lot of battery life. So it's not as easy as it might seem, and it's definitely expensive to roll out. So if the investment is there, it's possible to do it, and I think we've seen that from Joe's slides. But islands probably need a slightly specialized environment and supports and incentives to make EV uptake match the sort of initial expectation that it should be easy.
Thank you. So let me. I think we have seen a pretty broad range of different kinds of issues and applications and locations. Let me follow up with some questions that have been asked and try to paraphrase them where I need to. So one thing that I'm quite aware of, having been in the power business a long time, is the technical side of the question. If you start putting charging stations in various locations, you affect the grid, and again, we're all concerned now about the stability of the grid. This might be directed at Stephen, but also anybody else. I am curious about, Joe as well. You're working in a small island that's obviously got utility issues. Anyone have some thoughts about how to cope with the technical side of this, the transformers and substations and frequency controls, all those issues that become central if you're running a grid? Stephen, you might be the one to start with this, but anybody else wants to join in, I think that would be an important topic to cover.
Yeah, sure. I know that has been sort of something that it's been expressed by our engineering operations teams, especially with sort of our time of use rollout, where we have one on peak time and then one off peak time. And so there's a concern that if everyone has smart charging and everyone is setting it to start charging at 9 o'clock once the on peak period ends, and the energy gets cheaper to use, then we're going to have some major issues with just a massive ramp at that particular, not just hour, but that particular maybe 5 minutes or so. So that's definitely something that we'll be looking into. Again, we haven't rolled out the rate just yet, and we're going to definitely be monitoring it. The way we are rolling it out is as a pilot, so we aren't expecting too massive of an impact right at the outset of it, but certainly as we looked at that graph with the EV growth, our load will certainly be growing over the next 20 years, and we'll definitely be trying to tackle different issues where hopefully with some of the energy management that Leah was just talking about with the public charging as well, if there are ways to smooth it out throughout the day, that'll definitely be at the forefront of what our planning team will be doing, what our customer resource division, when they go out and talk to customers about their charging habits, that'll be something that's a high priority to discuss as well. But yeah, certainly it's definitely on the mind.
Adam, I'm happy to add. Another aspect of that is actually then the cost to the consumer. So in the case of Barbados, if you're a company and your fleet has 8 or 10 vehicles and you plug them all in at once, that can also spike your demand charge. So we've been working with smart chargers on looking at staggered charging. So say the majority of companies are charging overnight. So looking at the first vehicle going on maybe at 6 p.m. and then 2 hours later, the next one. So looking at kind of a combination of staggered charging, but also then back to the original question, it certainly is a challenge and will be a challenge without, proper planning. And that is where electric utility involvement is critical, especially as larger batteries in vehicles such as buses become plugged in. That issue then really becomes real if planning has not been taken into consideration by the utility.
Yeah, if I can address that, just I wanted to ask Leah about it too and what her experience might have been with the utilities, but since Joe brought up demand charge, I was also curious if there are other experiences out there. At this time, Alameda does not have any special rates for their public chargers, and there's, I believe, 2 current public chargers being provided, Tesla, and then ChargePoint has one in Alameda. There's another one planned to start operating next year, I believe. So we've seen other public utilities down in Southern California develop a special rate, but it's not something that we have enough data on, I believe, at this moment to kind of look at that load shape and develop a good rate for it. So Joe, do you have any insights into some of the rate structure around public charging and how that's been sort of able to impact the load management side?
Sorry, that's a me question or a Leah question, or both?
I guess both. I'm not sure if she's still on the call, but you mentioned demand charge, so I'm wondering what your experience was with that as well.
So Barbados we have a sole electric utility. We're regulated by the Fair Trading Commission. And so there's kind of very little wiggle room in terms of different tariffs, but what we have proposed is a time of use tariff. And again, looking at where the demand spikes, how can we help flatline them with electric vehicles? And this is all theoretical at this stage because we put a proposal in, but this is a process. So we're not doing anything formally now. We do have a pilot with DHL. And that is where we are charging at different times overnight, just looking at how to flatline their demand charge. That's more from the customer side of ensuring that they don't now find that all these great savings from electric vehicles they aren't able to realize because the demand charge eats that up.
Yeah,
what I would say. Yeah, sorry, sorry, Stephen. So to answer your question or to chime in on that, yeah, so we started to see in Southern California EV-specific utility rates, and it's more to do with the demand charges than so the cost of power rather than the cost of the actual energy, the kilowatt hour dispensed, and to make the business case more palatable and not to handicap the electric vehicles, particularly the larger electric vehicles, utilities like Southern California Edison have responded with specific tariffs for electric vehicles. We see this now also starting to happen in the southeast of the United States, and we think this will happen on a more broad scale. The problem today is that the utility rates are structured for fixed assets, not for movable assets, and not really for transport assets either. So it's definitely an issue on the large vehicle side because of the amount of power involved, and of course because the consumption of energy itself is larger. But the regulators have a role to play here as well. But if the rate structure is correct, then we see situations very quickly where electric vehicle adoption from a TCO point of view, or total life vehicle, is more favorable compared to liquid fuels, and that's even without taking into account the punitive measures for environmental, the legislation or regulations, air quality zones, etc. So the utility has a very significant role to play to enable electric vehicles, and some of the utilities in California have been very proactive with make-ready programs and so forth for EV adoption as well, particularly for the larger EV fleets.
Thank you. One question that's tied into that a little bit is whether any folks on the call have experience outside of the land vehicles. I have experience with ports, and there's a lot of concern about consumption, greenhouse gases from the shipping industry. And I know James Elsmore had talked about a ferry that's going electric. Has anybody on the call been involved in any port or seaside marine issues with electrification at all? Another issue where rate design comes up, of course.
Yeah, so at ChargePoint, we have a project at the Port of Long Beach where we are currently, and also the rail terminus at Stockton, California. And there's a number of projects in Europe that we're sort of touching as well, where people want to electrify what they call yard tractors or shunters for moving trailers on and off, roll-on, roll-off vessels, and for moving containers in and out of the port. We're also working on something that actually goes from the port out into the southern Los Angeles area with container traffic for electric trucks, electric Class 8 trucks.
Right.
The approach to those projects, they're not dissimilar from some of the transit bus electrification schemes in terms of the power requirements and in terms of the utility support. The difference is that, well, maybe not difference, but there's also a lot of support, and the California Air Resources Board has actively supporting programs for the electrification of those kind of vehicles. And there's a lot of companies now beginning to sort of play in that space and provide vehicles, and obviously then people like ChargePoint providing infrastructure solutions as well. But they're extremely demanding environments. So, but that could be a good application in islands, actually. That could be a very good application for heavy vehicles at the start, which would have a big impact in terms of greenhouse gas savings, sort of fuel substitution, diesel versus electricity. And they've got a quite predictable operation cycle, but they really need to work though, especially when the ships arrive in the port.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've done a fair amount of work with on what's called cold ironing or shore power, which again electrifying the visits of cruise ships and container ships. And I know there's a lot of interest in that in California. I had heard less about that and similar issues in the Caribbean. But it sounds like that, as you said, that might be a good start. For a variety of islands that have active ports and heavy vehicles. That's an interesting area to think about. That's a very, very useful comment. I want to involve... Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, related to that, you could also look at the area of, a sort of multimodal charging hub. So it's something that we've looked at in Europe, not actually at a port, but it could apply to a port as well, where you would have a installed charger base, perhaps with some local energy storage, so with a battery storage system. And maybe this could be linked to a setup you'd have for shore power for shipping. But you could charge the vehicles, so you could create a hub where you could charge those vehicles, but then you could have front-facing, the distances weren't too great, you could have sort of almost like consumer-facing or commercial-facing chargers that could be used to charge, other compatible vehicles, maybe like taxis or sort of mini buses, even buses, delivery trucks, things like that, so that you create this sort of fueling area. So you have it for your core use, which is your port activities, but then you can also utilize it to create additional revenue and more utilization for other vehicles. And the kind of networking stuff that we do at ChargePoint then allows you to actually do that and run that kind of scheme. And the technology can be, the front end user interfaces can be switched to different back end converters.
Right. And then there's this issue of chicken and egg, which is how to get the infrastructure built when the rate design doesn't really promote it, and vice versa. So as we talked about, a lot of the issue here is do you have the right rate design or financial incentives for people to actually do this? And again, that's a tough thing to deal with, particularly when utilities are using diesel, let's say, and have a lot of high energy costs. So it's a very tough thing to promote electric vehicles in that kind of environment, but it makes a lot of sense. I want to involve James Taylor if he's still here. There are a bunch of questions I think directed at more along the lines of how do we get involved. You've mentioned the interest in finding an island, let's say a coastal application. You mentioned obviously people could contact you directly. Maybe you could say just a little bit more about what you're looking for there, and again I assume they would contact you directly. But what are your kind of can you provide a little more detail on what you're looking for as a partner, let's say, with an island for your series of races? Yes,
absolutely, and thank you, Adam. We would be open-minded to talking to all of you about an opportunity, and I've actually already been exchanging a few emails with Joe on this about possibility in Barbados. Obviously, to maximise the impact of our championship, our product, and each race, working with a national or local government does help in terms of facilitating customs issues, docking issues, all those things for the ship, for the cargo. But in terms of a racing area, it could be on any type of surface, from sand through to forest areas, perhaps that have been damaged, or gravel, or perhaps even a mine. It would be a racetrack in length of between 6 and 10 kilometers long. And when I say racetrack, we would create that racetrack. And just to reassure you, one of our main mantras is race without a trace, so that once we have raced there, we will certainly ensure that it is repaired and improved beyond how it was when we first arrived. But in terms of the specific requirements, we are fairly self-sufficient. But obviously, any support you can provide us from the security side of things, the policing side of things, which won't be as big as a normal event, because we won't have the we won't have the number of spectators coming to the event that we normally would at, say, a Formula E race or a Formula One race. As I said, it's more of a media product. But yeah, I mean, in short, we are fairly self-sufficient. But if anyone can help us in a specific island location, obviously we would be very welcoming of that assistance.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question that's tied in with some of the things people asked about. So as I mentioned early on, in the United States and much of North America, we're doing quite a bit to decarbonize the utility industry, the power industry, particularly in California, for example, but in much of the United States. If you count natural gas as being low carbon, let's say, relatively speaking, we're making pretty big strides in that direction. So I think there's a recognition that that e-mobility is kind of part of the solution, I think, to the climate and environmental issues. But if you're in a place like, I'm going to use an example, I've worked a fair amount in the Caribbean, but use an example like Jamaica, which is kind of slowly going that direction. But if you lose other islands, Haiti, which is again, I worked there a fair amount, but much of the other islands, are using fossil fuels primarily, and they have a commitment to the environment, but it's very, very difficult to do that. Well, I guess the long-winded question is, to what extent do those of you that are working on islands see e-mobility as being received by the public and the government as part of the solution, particularly when you're using, let's say, diesel as your source of power? Any thoughts about that? Because I do think that's important to have e-mobility seen as not just a nice, fun thing, but also a solution to a problem. But it's hard in many islands to make it, to form that link. So I'll stop there. Any response on that?
Sure, I can jump in there. I mean, it's been a hard slog since 2013, but our government is now definitely serious about the transport sector as it pertains to renewable energy and also electric mobility, with the view that by 2030, no one will be able to sell gas or diesel vehicles unless they are biodiesel. So, I mean, they have made that statement, but it's one thing to make a statement and have a vision, but still we're waiting on legislation and policy to ensure that that is realized. But it's a really positive step.
Thank you so much. Any other input on that topic? Okay. I do know where we have a little bit of time left, but let me, in a way, use that time to focus on kind of concrete recommendations, success stories, examples. I think several people have asked, what are the specific things that we could do? Where are things actually going well? Are there models for success? And so I guess I'd like to maybe go around the room with those kind of concrete thoughts in mind, and maybe we could start, kind of in reverse order. Leah, I don't know if you're still available, but any thoughts you have about, what would you recommend to an island or any organization, any jurisdiction that's serious about e-mobility? What's working? What's not working? Where can we look for role models in this whole field?
Okay, so I would say that, and I've been involved in e-mobility myself since 2008. So I got involved in the very beginning, and many of the issues that you face today and that you sort of talked about a little bit on the call are really where the industry was a number of years ago. So I think so that's good because you can learn from the mistakes that other people made. I think one of the first things is you need a supply of vehicles. I know it sounds really base and so obvious, but you actually do need a supply of vehicles and you need a choice of vehicles, because electric vehicles are competing against very flexible fuels today, diesel and petrol and gas. So you need to have vehicles that give people some choice. You just can't have one type of car. You must have different types. You must have a vehicle supply. Then you need to have reliable charging infrastructure. That's incredibly important. In Ireland, where I live, the national utility rolled out about 2,000 charging points, and 3 years in, probably 60% of them, anecdotally at least, the perception was they weren't working. I experienced it firsthand myself when I got my first plug-in car a number of years ago. So you need reliable infrastructure, because people just won't. Why would you leave a reliable fuel behind, despite its carbon credentials, to swap that for a wholly unreliable fuel? So that's, I think, very important. So vehicle choice, reliable infrastructure. And I think if you get those building blocks right, of course, having the right kind of tariff, having some sort of an incentive scheme as well. So being able to use your electric car in places that you mightn't be able to use a regular car, or having certain advantages. So, in larger urban areas or in bigger countries, you can have, incentives around congestion charge in London, for example, doesn't apply to electric vehicles. In Ireland, people can get reductions pay no tolls with electric cars, get a reduction with a hybrid car. So you can introduce things like free parking, things like that, preferential treatment for drivers. So I think you need an incentive program. Norway's been very good at that. So there's lots of examples there what they did. You need reliable infrastructure and need a choice of vehicles. And somebody that knows what they're doing, I think, to sort of try to run and coordinate that and use best international practice to learn from the mistakes that have been made elsewhere. And you don't have to look too far for the mistakes, because there's been countless mistakes made over the last 10 years.
Thank you, I think. James, some thoughts?
yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, I think it's crucial to make electric cars and e-mobility cool and desirable. And how do we do that locally? Obviously, major car manufacturers are going to do that on a global basis and a major market by market basis. But why not use local influencers, influencer marketing, whether it's a sports star to support it, or a well-respected member of the community in a smaller community. If they're seen to be using electric vehicles, then others will surely follow. Certainly, that's one thing. Secondly, just education on understanding the longer-term cost benefits versus the short-term, perhaps slightly more expensive car to purchase or lease. But I think it's important to present people with the bare facts on the cost of running these cars over a longer term, and actually how that can help them financially.
Thank you. Stephen?
Sure, yeah. So I'd say for utilities, I think the best role that they can play is sort of be the trusted advisor to their customers for e-mobility. So for prospective owners of EVs, that's giving them the information about costs, how to impact their energy bills, how to get access to charging. For the businesses out there, trying to enable them to install public chargers, giving them the rebates that are necessary to give that financial incentive. And then for partnerships with vendors of public charging, as we talked about a lot, setting up sort of rates and the financial incentives to sort of set up the infrastructure that benefits those people coming in and installing the chargers, but ultimately it's the benefit to the owners of the EVs that'll have access to charging so they can feel more comfortable making those purchases. So yeah, just being a good source of information, but also providing those incentives, because that's going to ultimately be what achieves our environmental goals as well as serving our customers.
Thank you. Joe?
I think that partnership piece is really critical. It's being, the anchor success with our business. So partnering both with the electric utility, but also with landlords where we want to put charging locations. With customers, we do a lot of joint marketing. So looking partnerships for leverage, really, and partnerships where everyone can benefit. So showing the value add of having EVs and charging infrastructure in your business, or indeed, we've done partnerships with the government here. We recently signed a contract with National Petroleum Corporation. And when I formed my business in 2013, if someone had said to me then, the National Petroleum Corporation is going to be buying EVs, I would have said, hell no. But it's really about forging those partnerships, which then highlight and emphasize that change is possible.
Thank you so much. Well, let me just summarize. We're wrapping up. We're running out of time. It sounds to me, from what I hear, it's an overused term. And again, I live in basically the center of Silicon Valley. But the term ecosystem is this very popular word, and I think actually does apply. And it's very hard, of course, to create entirely new ones. But it sounds like there are a lot of pieces to that: rates, infrastructure, businesses, vehicles, roads. All these things need to come together, and that's a big challenge. But I think it's something we need to do, frankly. So I'd like to thank the panelists. I'd like to thank James Elsmore in particular for organizing this. I think it's a great low carbon way of getting our ideas together. And my understanding is that there'll be plenty of available resources after this session through links and Facebook and email addresses, of course, so that people can review the presentations, can interact with each other, and move this forward as it needs to be, as we need to. So again, thanks very much, everyone, and hopefully you'll have a good time in the next sessions. Bye-bye.
Thanks, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.